The Green Party's new leader is extremely charismatic.
But the Greens will never dance to the tune of a Trump-loving, tax-avoiding, science-denying, NHS-dismantling corporate stooge. You might as well stay on your feet, because I'm going to say, we'll say it loud, we'll say it clear, migrants and refugees are welcome here! Then we will never be silent. It is time for a party that will tax the assets of the 1%, tax the wealthiest, invest in our public services, bring down bills by ending privatisation. That's how we have a country we can all afford to live in.
We can stop the small boats crisis. The answer is not to blame the migrants. The answer is not to point at the small boats. The answer is to point at the private jets, the private yachts, and to multimillionaires and billionaires and say we will fund our public services, we will build council houses, we will invest in our NHS.
If reform can rocket through the polls with a politics of despair, then it's time for the Green Party to do the same thing, but with a politics of hope.
But I think he might accidentally destroy the entire UK economy. And they would do it completely accidentally. Their plan is to abolish private landlords. Well, kind of, sort of.
The Green Party want to abolish landlords. They've said that landlords bring no value to the UK economy.
Firstly, they would put on a lot of rent controls, so they would make it so that rents can't be increased very much. But crucially, what they would do is they would make it so that landlords can't get mortgages. And the idea is that basically landlords sell up and more houses get owned by people and less by landlords, which sounds amazing. But I'm not sure they fully thought it through. Okay, so if a landlord can't get a mortgage anymore, when their mortgage term ends, which is typically after 2 or 5 years, if they have a mortgage, they're going to have to sell, right? They're not going to have any choice. Now, under these new rules, there's not going to be many people that want to become a landlord because, well, firstly, they won't be able to get a mortgage anyway. So that means that there's no landlords are really going to buy it. The benefit is that house prices will probably come down slightly. So that's one side of it. And that might make it easier for first-time buyers to buy a house. But what happens to that tenant that was renting, right? Because if the landlord is selling the property and not many new landlords are going to be buying because there's going to be so many rules, then what happens to that tenant? Well, presumably they get kicked out of the property. Well, that doesn't sound very good for the tenants, but I think it's highly unlikely that this would happen. What I think the Green Party would do instead is what they would do is they would say, no, it's illegal to kick tenants out of the property and it's illegal to put the rents. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this is now fantastic. This solves the problem. The tenants are safe. But that's where I'm saying they haven't thought this through. End up in a situation where the landlord has to sell, but he can't sell. And then probably what's going to happen is a lot of landlords are going to go bankrupt. I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, well, that's fine. I'm happy for the landlord to go bankrupt. But again, what happens to the tenant? Then after the landlord goes bankrupt, what happens is the bank is going to seize the home and then the bank is going to try and sell it. And in order to try and sell it, well, firstly, the bank's not going to be able to sell it because, as I said, no landlords are going to buy it. And I bet you they're not going to be able to kick the tenants out. Then what's going to happen is you're going to have a banking crisis because you're going to have all of these loans that these banks have given out and they're not going to be able to get paid. Firstly, you're going to have the landlords that can't pay the mortgages. Then you're going to have the banks trying to reclaim the loans, but then they can't sell the properties because they can't kick the tenants out and there's no landlords that want to buy it. What's going to likely happen is the banks are going to go bankrupt. And now the problem with the banks going bankrupt is all of us have our money in banks. And when the banks go bankrupt, it's going to be a massive crisis. Do you remember 2008? And if we all try and withdraw our money from the banks at the same time, the banks can't do it because the banks have lent out all of the money into things like property, which now they have an issue because they can't sell the property, so they can't get their money back. Then when the banks collapse, we have a financial crisis. Lots of people in the banking industry lose their jobs, then lots of other people lose their jobs as well. And as house prices collapse, as we go through this sequence of events, the problems get even worse because your ordinary person, your average Joe that owns a house that they live in, well, the value of their house starts to tumble. And as the value of their house starts to tumble, their debt compared to the property that they own becomes slightly crazy. The debt kind of becomes a little bit out of control. And so I think the Green Party really needs to do an impact assessment, which I doubt they've done properly, because I'm pretty sure that if the Green Party did what they want to do, they would cause a literal economic and housing crisis. In theory, it sounds like a good idea. In practice, you might bankrupt Britain, but in theory,